Welcome to GothCast, I'm Dr. Sanders, and today I got something that I am very excited to talk about. I guess like most things I talk about, because when I talk about things I hate, sometimes I do. But that's not what I'm talking about today. Today, I'm going to be talking about this book, The Photography of Eerily, Misery Obscura. I think it has the dates, 1981 to 2009. Now, the book was initially published in 2009, but this is the 2016 publishing of the book. And I guess, I was trying to look around online to see, why there's two specific pressings. Of course, I'm pretty sure it just sold out right away. And then, a lot of things, like even the Roz Williams book I reviewed, where it had to be republished later, there's just a demand for it. And it's so good. It covers three main bands and then a whole bunch of smaller ones. It's going to be the Misfits, Samhain, and Danzig. And those are all groups that Eerily had a lot of involvement with. And it kind of tells the story of those bands through his perspective by focusing on specific shows, specific albums, and specific moments in the career of those bands. A good example is, the Metallica tour with Danzig, and it will focus on that and kind of that section and kind of go over, oh, here's a description of it throughout those months. Or it'll have a Misfits show and like, here's a specific Misfits show from 1980 and here was our setup, here's where we went there, and here's the shots from it. For those of you who don't know who Eerily is, he's probably most well known for being the bassist for the band Danzig. At least in a mainstream sense, because Danzig actually, has like a big crossover hit with the song Mother and, stuff. But this book covers his photography and his music career, which is really cool. And the main parts of it, I think the main parts that most people, are drawn to this book for are the Misfits, Samhain, and Danzig parts. It does cover some of his band, like Rosemary's Babies, and a whole host of other little guest spots from other musicians. I'll talk about a little bit of that, and some of his solo stuff. But those three bands, Misfits, Samhain, and Danzig, I'm sure are what attracts most people to this in the first place. I know that's why I was so interested. Just having a book that focuses on Samhain at all, it was really like, whoa, okay, I need to check this out. And by the way, I want to talk about this, address this right off the bat. I know tons of people, I get comments, because I've mentioned the band Samhain a whole bunch of times, and people always say, oh, it's pronounced Samhain. Some people say it says Samhain. People always wonder, how do you pronounce this word? And yes, there's a ton of different media that pronounces it differently. In fact, Danzig had this problem with his album Death Red Sabaoth, but most people just called it Dead Red Sabbath. So yeah, Danzig likes the kind of different spellings and all this stuff. But I decided to turn to the actual band members themselves to figure out, how the heck do you say this name properly? Because I was so sick of hearing everybody give me a different answer. A lot of people say Samhain, a lot of people say Samhain, some people say Samhain. So here you go. Here's what the band members call the band.
The only problem is the moment the record came out, I got asked to be in Samhain. Within the same month, I had gone up to New Jersey and auditioned for Samhain and gotten the gig.
Whether it's Samhain, Misfits, or Danzig, it's Glenn. Always has been, always will be.
Right now.
Samhain hasn't reformed.
We haven't got a reform.
Samhain hasn't reformed. We haven't.
Okay, that's, as far as I'm concerned, it's Samhain. If Danzig says it's Samhain, it's considered Samhain to me. Now, something else you might be saying to yourself, you might be saying, Dr. Sanders, what the heck are you talking about? None of these bands are goth bands. And you're pretty much right. But that doesn't mean that all three of these bands, Misfits, Samhain, and Danzig, aren't bands that goths really enjoy. And bands that I enjoy. I like the Misfits. I like Samhain a lot. I like Danzig's solo stuff. Some of Danzig's solo stuff is maybe maybe I don't like it that much, but his first four albums are really good. And, especially number 3 has a whole H.R. Giger thing going on. And I really like some of the music. Maybe I'll talk about it in some other video, but yeah, I know these bands really aren't considered goth, but hey, I like spooky stuff, and of course, horror punk, which is what Misfits are considered. I like that. In fact, there's a lot of similarities between early death rock and like, horror punk. And yeah, that's a whole subject. Basically, I'm saying, yeah, I know these aren't like straightforward goth bands, but hey, it's music I like. Well, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the book. Now, if you need a little bit of a refresher on, what's the relation between all these bands, here's just a really quick rundown. So Danzig is a singer of the Misfits. He started with, Jerry Only and Doyle and all this stuff. And he started that in the 70s. It carried in the 80s, and he formed a band called Samhain with different members, which was taken, I think, maybe a little bit more seriously for him, push the musicality in different directions. And then, after Samhain was done with, well, Eerily Von essentially went and formed a new band, Danzig, which was a lot more blues-based and, like, kind of eventually went into a little more influenced by kind of straightforward rock. So, yeah, if you're wondering, like, what's the relation between all these bands, Misery Obscura is a great introduction to these bands. It really helps if you know the music, obviously. You've heard me say a million times whenever I am reviewing or talking about music books, you know that when I am reading a certain section about a certain album or a certain era of a band, like say when I was reading Lowell Tolhurst's book on The Cure, as he was talking about, pornography or Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, I would just listen to that album and really get a viewpoint of the time, or like watch YouTube videos or live, performances by the bands to kind of set the mood for what was taking place in the book. And this is another great book like that. It starts off with Eerily Von as basically, just a photographer, for a band like the Misfits, and eventually, gets up on stage with Glenn Danzig, forms a band, and then, Danzig reached such great heights throughout the late 80s and early 90s. And it's really cool, his journey from that to basically be like, helping a band take photographs to being on stage himself. And it's a really cool journey. And one of the best things about this book is the way he paints it. Really good with words and really good at really putting you into the situation when he's talking about the dingy clubs that the Misfits play, but how great they were, and setting up the whole, before they went on, they had this issue and all that kind of stuff. It's a really great book for kind of visualizing yourself and putting yourself into that scenario that he's going to take these photos in. And it's just worth it for me because I've been such a fan of these bands for so long that just seeing really old school photos of the Misfits in such high quality, I mean, it's almost like hard to believe sometimes because, a lot of music back then wasn't documented as well. People tried to make it up, the difference as time went on with like blurry photographs and stuff, but Eery's photography in this is amazing, especially for the time when he's talking about, hey, I was just an amateur, stuff. But these shots of the Misfits in here are so amazing, and that's just worth the price of admission alone. But hearing him talk about, his journey into, joining the band Samhain and stuff, and it switches over to fans, photographing him because he obviously couldn't be off stage photograph himself, or Danzig was up there playing. It's really cool because he still picks really good shots. And I mean, man, I'm so used to like really blurry footage or really old photographs of Samhain and stuff, or things from like old CD booklets, that it's so cool to see them blown up on a huge book picture. And the impression I got from the book wasn't that Eerily Von was really stuck up or like a big kind of rock star, bloated kind of guy. It's very humorous, and I really like that because you get that feeling from, listening to some of those bands that they are aware of the image that they're portraying, whether that be the craziness of the Misfits, wearing like makeup that makes them look like a corpse, or singing about all these, horror movies and stuff like that, or, even Danzig's, romantic sensuality and dark music. You get the feeling that these guys were, it's kind of goofballs in a way, but, they took their craft very seriously. And that pretty much is reaffirmed here, in that the band did like to play jokes on each other and always hassle each other on tour and stuff. But when it got down to making music, they took it very seriously. Talks about how Danzig as a guy, Glenn Danzig, was very serious about like, okay, you know, this part needs to be better, or like, you know, pushing his career and his musicality a lot further than say when he was with the Misfits, or even when he was in Samhain, then going to Danzig and trying to push every album farther. So it's really cool to see that journey, and it's pretty cool when you hear him talking about like, oh yeah, we were playing these dingy clubs, you know, this van's like barely working and stuff, and then when it gets up to, you know, Danzig 3 and, you know, and like Danzig 2 Lucified and stuff, and you see the studio pictures, it's just crazy seeing that evolution. You know, some pretty important years going from the Misfits to Danzig in the 90s. That's a huge jump, and it's documented really well in this book. Now, if you've seen my other reviews, you may remember when I reviewed the book, The Art of Gothic, and I said it was somewhere in between an actual book, you know, like a novel, and a coffee table book, because it did have a lot of really in-depth writing on these certain things and great photos, but it was also very descriptive. This is kind of in that same vein where it is, you know, a book, but if you had to remove all the pages that just had, you know, his paragraphs of writing on them, it'd be a very short book. It works really well. In fact, I think it's actually about the best way you could structure this kind of book. It is very concise, it's very easy to follow, and I really cannot understate how awesome the photos are in this. Seriously, like some of the best photos. If you're a fan of the Misfits, or, you know, Samhain or Danzig or Eerily Vaughn's career in general, this is like the book, in my opinion. You know, I wish, there are definitely some things I wish that were more fleshed out, especially being in the studio. You know, if it's a one-page kind of description of like, here's what was in studio, or like, you know, just a few pages of, oh, Rick Rubin made us work this hard. You know, I could read that, a whole book of that kind of experience, because I really like kind of documentation of like, here's what it took to create this, and here's what it's like being on tour. I find those kind of books very interesting. But this is a great way to put this together for somebody. And this may be a strange thing to comment on this book, but I'm going to anyway, I guess. But it's hard to describe, is the layouts of everything. You know, there's tour passes, there's old ticket stubs, there's notes, you know, that Doyle had handwritten to Eerily. You know, the way it's laid out with the photographs of that time are really good and really catches your eye. It doesn't feel cluttered. It feels kind of like a scrapbook for the people who were involved, but, you know, we get access to it as well, you know, as consumers. So that's just so great. I just love it. This product does not feel half-assed. It doesn't feel cheap. In fact, it's so great. The hardbound, you know, like this is like a serious book, you know. Like if you threw this at me, this would probably hurt. And yeah, it could be longer. I mean, but that's a great problem to have, is you wanting more of a book. But the high gloss pages, they feel just amazing. And sometimes whenever you have these kind of photo books like this, the font is sometimes hard to read. Not an issue here. You know, I don't have the best vision. In fact, I have really bad vision. I was still never straining to read this. And one of the other things I wanted to mention about this book, I know a lot of you watching really enjoy early Marilyn Manson, you know, like his first album or maybe first 2 or 3 albums, even though, you know, his music is very controversially tasteful in goth. You know, some people can't even stand it when people listen to him, but you know what I'm saying, right? You know it's controversial. Well, there is some early Marilyn Manson stuff from the 90s in here, so I thought some people would enjoy that, but it's really cool to see the really early parts of these bands. You know, you have Rob Zombie and a whole bunch of different people in here. So yeah, if you want a little bit of a dose of that, then it is included in Misery Obscura. Now you may be saying to yourself, Dr. Sanders, you know, I'm only interested in the Sisters of Mercy and The Cure and Bauhaus. You know, would I even be interested in this book? You know, I don't know. I mean, maybe it kind of depends on your interest in these bands, just like any book that releases. You know, if you don't like, you know, Bauhaus, I probably wouldn't recommend David J's book. You know, that's just kind of how it works. But I think there's a lot of people who watch my show who are into the Misfits or Danzig or Samhain who would really, really like this book. I can't recommend it enough for that. For that fan, yes, this is absolutely a must buy. I really enjoyed it. In fact, even more than I thought I was going to. Just seeing the cool pics of, like, literally the Misfits at McDonald's. That's just so weird because it really humanizes them. You know, you always, you know, obviously I know, you know, people I look up to or people whose music I really appreciate. They're human beings. But this is a very intimate behind the scenes look at all of these bands and musicians who maybe weren't given enough of the limelight behind Glenn Danzig singing. But there are some strange things, or at least I guess nitpicks or questions I have. One, when this was sent over, you know, don't you hate it how like people, whenever they're delivering a book or something like that, the corner gets all nicked and dented? Hate this. This is like a seriously like heavy duty book, and this corner got all bent. But, you know, it doesn't matter. As long as the book is fine and everything, then what do I have to worry about, you know? They shouldn't just discount or, you know, get rid of a book or be that angry about a book that gets dented a little bit because, hey, you know, like, you know, hurt books need love too. Oh yeah, and this was a really weird thing about this book. So when I received this book, there were these two little pamphlet ad things for other books, right? You know, a lot of times when you order books, you get these kind of things where I'll say, you know, this is a New York hardcore book called NYHC, you know, also published by Bazillion Points. That's the name of the company who published this book. And this is a really weird one. There's an ad for this book called Teenagers from Mars, The Misfits Among Us, 1978 to 2006. And as far as I can tell, this book hasn't been published and I can't find any info about it. And if you go to Bazillion Points, like Facebook and stuff, there's people asking about this book. So it's really weird that I ordered this book like 2 weeks ago and it came with this ad, and I would buy this book. I mean, heck, a book on the Misfits from this time? Heck yeah, sign me up. But as far as I can tell, there hasn't been an update on this. So yeah, I don't know what this is. Well, that is my review of Misery Obscura. I hope you really enjoyed it. Heck, like I said, I really enjoyed this book. So if you want something that is a little more specific to your taste, you know, in those bands, because I know specifically for Danzig, the band, and Samhain, there's a lot less coverage of those eras of his career because they're just not as popular as, you know, Misfits. There's not a billion t-shirts and all that stuff. So it's really cool. And Eerily really paints a snapshot of what it was like to be in those bands at that time, you know, before the whole Misfits wave and that kind of stuff, the revitalization and everything. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I guess I'll leave a link down where you can find it, and hopefully, you know, hopefully it's still available when you're looking for it. But hope you enjoy, and of course you can blah 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 yada yada, subscribe, like that smash button, ring the bell notification to get, gosh, YouTube is so weird sometimes. Anyway, stay spooky.